Ever wondered what Amish communities really believe about outsiders and people from different backgrounds? While stereotypes paint them as isolated and potentially prejudiced, the truth about their actual beliefs might completely surprise you and challenge everything you think you know. Universal image. The foundation of all Amish beliefs about people comes from Genesis. They believe every human being, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background, is created in God's image. This isn't a modern adaptation to political correctness, but a centuries-old theological principle that shapes how they view all outsiders. To them, divine image means inherent human worth and dignity for everyone. English definition. Here's what most people don't understand. The Amish use the term English to describe all non-Amish people, regardless of their actual race or nationality. Whether you're African American, Hispanic, Asian, or white, you're simply English to them. This linguistic choice reveals that their primary social division isn't racial, it's between Amish and non-Amish. Race doesn't determine how they categorize people. Religious and cultural identity does. Religious boundaries. The separation that people interpret as racial prejudice is actually religious separation designed to preserve their faith and lifestyle. They maintain distance from the outside world to protect their spiritual values and traditional practices, not because they dislike people of different races. This separation affects their relationships with all outsiders equally. A wealthy white businessman receives the same polite but distant treatment as anyone else from the modern world. Their boundaries are spiritual and cultural, not racial. Acceptance stories. Real-world examples prove their openness to racial diversity. Several documented cases exist of Amish families adopting African American children, providing them with loving homes within traditional Amish communities. These adoptions didn't happen as publicity stunts, but as natural expressions of their belief in caring for children in need, regardless of race. The adopted children receive the same religious education, cultural training, and community acceptance as biological Amish children. They learn Pennsylvania Dutch, participate fully in community activities, and grow up completely integrated into Amish society without experiencing racial discrimination from community members. Additionally, a few individuals from various racial backgrounds have successfully joined Amish communities after extensive preparation and genuine religious conviction, proving that race doesn't determine community acceptance when faith commitment is authentic. Economic equality. Despite stereotypes about isolation, Amish communities regularly engage in business relationships with people of all racial backgrounds, demonstrating practical equality in their economic interactions. They participate in farmers markets in diverse urban areas, maintaining respectful business relationships with customers and vendors from many different backgrounds without racial tension or discrimination. Their approach to business reflects their religious principles rather than racial preferences. Amish merchants serve customers of all races equally, focusing on honest dealing and fair prices rather than making distinctions based on appearance or ethnicity. They maintain professional relationships with diverse suppliers and often collaborate with neighboring farms owned by people of different races. These business interactions involve equipment sharing, labor exchange during harvest times, and cooperative marketing of products. Such practical partnerships demonstrate that economic cooperation transcends racial boundaries when mutual benefit exists, proving that their religious values support fair treatment regardless of the other person's background. Emergency unity. When natural disasters strike diverse communities, Amish volunteers travel hundreds of miles to provide free labor for rebuilding efforts, working alongside volunteers from all racial backgrounds without hesitation or discrimination. They focus on helping disaster victims regardless of race rather than maintaining social separation during crisis situations. These relief missions often last for weeks, with Amish families temporarily relocating to affected areas to provide sustained assistance. During these periods, they live and work in close proximity with diverse groups while maintaining their religious practices and cultural identity without racial conflict or tension. hurricane recovery efforts in Louisiana, tornado cleanup in Alabama, and flood assistance in various states have all featured Amish volunteers working side by side with African American, Hispanic, and other minority community members. Their participation in these efforts demonstrates that their religious obligation to help others extends across all racial lines. The cooperation during emergencies reveals their true character. Said, when people need help, race becomes irrelevant, and human need takes priority over any social boundaries they normally maintain for religious reasons. Marriage rules. While Amish communities have strict rules about marriage partners, these restrictions are based on religious faith rather than racial considerations. Marriage partners must come from within the Amish community or acceptable related communities with similar beliefs and practices. But these requirements apply equally regardless of the potential partner's racial background. The key barriers to marriage aren't racial but religious and cultural. Prospective partners must demonstrate sincere conversion to Amish beliefs, complete commitment to their lifestyle, and willingness to abandon modern conveniences permanently. They must learn Pennsylvania Dutch, adopt traditional clothing styles, and embrace agricultural lifestyles. The community's careful vetting process stems from historical experience with individuals who join temporarily for novelty rather than genuine conviction. Several documented cases exist of people from various racial backgrounds successfully marrying into Amish communities after demonstrating authentic commitment to the faith and lifestyle. Cultural protection. What outsiders interpret as exclusionary behavior actually serves to protect religious and cultural identity rather than exclude specific racial groups. The Amish maintain boundaries that seem restrictive, but actually create space for anyone willing to fully embrace their way of life, regardless of original background or ethnicity. Their community standards focus on preserving traditional practices, religious observance, and lifestyle choices that define Amish existence. These protective measures ensure that outside influences don't dilute their cultural heritage or compromise religious principles. The boundaries include restrictions on technology use, clothing styles, education levels, and social activities that might introduce worldly values inconsistent with their faith. Understanding this protective motivation helps explain why Amish communities can welcome people of different races while maintaining strict lifestyle requirements for cultural and spiritual preservation. Conversion process. The process for joining Amish communities remains the same regardless of an applicant's racial background, demonstrating equal treatment in their most important community decision. Prospective members must undergo extensive preparation periods, usually lasting several years, during which they prove their commitment to Amish beliefs and lifestyle choices. This conversion process involves learning Pennsylvania Dutch, adopting traditional clothing and customs, accepting community discipline systems, and demonstrating genuine spiritual conversion rather than mere curiosity. The requirements include giving up modern conveniences, embracing agricultural work, and submitting to community leadership. Community leaders evaluate potential members based on their spiritual sincerity, lifestyle commitment, and cultural adaptation, rather than racial characteristics. Several individuals from diverse racial backgrounds have successfully completed this conversion process, becoming full community members with equal standing and acceptance. Historical actions. Historical evidence demonstrates Amish commitment to racial equality through their actions during America's most challenging racial periods. During the Civil War era, some Amish families participated in Underground Railroad activities, risking personal safety to help escaped slaves reach freedom despite their pacifist principles. These actions demonstrated that religious principles could motivate anti-slavery activism when conducted through peaceful means consistent with their pacifist beliefs. Their opposition to slavery stemmed from moral convictions about human dignity rather than political motivations. Their pacifist traditions prevented participation in armed conflict, but didn't diminish their moral opposition to human bondage and racial oppression. Throughout the 20th century integration period, Amish communities adapted to increasing racial diversity in surrounding areas without abandoning traditional practices or developing prejudicial attitudes toward neighbors of different backgrounds. Media distortions. Modern misconceptions about Amish racial attitudes stem largely from media portrayals that emphasize the visual absence of racial diversity without explaining the religious and cultural barriers that limit membership regardless of race. Television shows and movies often present Amish communities as exclusively white, without mentioning that their boundaries are religious rather than racial. These media representations create false impressions about their attitudes toward people of different backgrounds by focusing on demographic appearance rather than underlying motivations for community composition. The entertainment industry tends to oversimplify complex religious communities for dramatic effect, missing the nuanced reality of their beliefs and practices. Academic discussions sometimes portray isolated religious groups as inherently prejudiced without examining their actual beliefs and behaviors toward people of different backgrounds. Scholarly analysis often emphasizes differences from mainstream society without fairly representing their values and interactions with diverse populations. Internet misinformation spreads false claims about Amish racial attitudes without verification or context, while social media discussions repeat stereotypes rather than presenting factual information. Tourism misinterpretation occurs when visitors notice demographic homogeneity and conclude that exclusion policies exist without understanding the complex cultural and religious factors that determine community membership and social interactions. Peaceful coexistence. The Amish commitment to pacifism directly influences their approach to racial relationships, requiring peaceful coexistence and respectful treatment of all people, regardless of background. Their religious opposition to violence extends beyond physical conflicts to include verbal aggression, social prejudice, and systematic oppression that characterize racial tensions in broader society. This pacifist stance creates natural barriers to racial discrimination since their faith requires treating all people with gentleness and respect. Christian love commandments guide their interpersonal relationships across all social boundaries, with their interpretation of Jesus' teachings about loving neighbors applying universally rather than selectively based on race or ethnicity. Humility doctrines prevent the pride and superiority attitudes that fuel racial prejudice, as their teachings emphasize human sinfulness and dependence on God's grace. If all humans are equally sinful and equally loved by God, then racial superiority becomes theologically impossible within their belief system. Community service obligations extend beyond Amish boundaries to include helping anyone in need, with their religious duty to serve others, including no racial restrictions or preferences. Forgiveness principles help heal racial wounds when conflicts occur, providing tools for overcoming misunderstandings and building bridges across cultural divides that separate many communities. Controlled exposure. The Amish approach to managing outside influences affects relationships with all outsiders equally rather than targeting specific racial groups, demonstrating that their separation serves religious rather than discriminatory purposes. Their educational choices protect children from influences they consider harmful to spiritual development, affecting exposure to all outside ideas rather than specifically racial diversity. Technology restrictions create natural barriers to social interaction that affect all outside relationships regardless of race, with communication limitations applying uniformly to neighbors of all backgrounds. Their rejection of automobiles, electricity, and modern communication devices creates practical challenges for maintaining close relationships with anyone from the outside world. Media avoidance prevents exposure to racial conflicts, stereotypes, and tensions that dominate modern news and entertainment, allowing them to maintain more innocent relationships with diverse people they encounter in daily life. By limiting exposure to divisive influences, they preserve peaceful attitudes toward all outsiders. Economic independence reduces dependence on outside employment and business relationships that might compromise their values while still engaging in necessary commerce with people of all backgrounds when needed. Cultural preservation requires maintaining distance from trends and movements that could dilute traditional practices, viewing both positive and negative social movements as outside influences. Demographic changes. As rural areas become increasingly diverse, Amish communities adapt to changing demographics without abandoning their traditional practices or developing prejudicial attitudes toward new neighbors of different racial backgrounds. Their response to demographic shifts demonstrates flexibility in maintaining community values while respecting diverse populations. Geographic changes bring more racial diversity to areas where Amish communities exist, creating opportunities for positive interactions that challenge stereotypes about their attitudes. These encounters often result in respectful neighborly relationships based on practical cooperation rather than social intimacy, maintaining their religious boundaries while showing basic human courtesy. Business relationships expand to include diverse customers and suppliers as local demographics change, with Amish merchants adapting to serve increasingly diverse populations without compromising their values or showing preferential treatment based on race. Professional interactions remain consistently respectful regardless of customer backgrounds. Integration experiences continue developing as Amish communities navigate contemporary racial discussions while maintaining focus on religious principles rather than political activism. Their approach emphasizes treating all people with dignity and respect rather than participating in social movements that could divide their communities or distract from spiritual priorities, proving that traditional values and racial respect can coexist peacefully. Community standards. The balance between maintaining religious values and showing respect for people of different backgrounds demonstrates how traditional communities can preserve their identity while avoiding racial prejudice. Amish community standards focus on spiritual and lifestyle conformity rather than racial homogeneity, creating clear distinctions between religious requirements and discriminatory practices. Their leadership systems monitor community compliance with religious and cultural standards while ensuring that these standards apply equally to all members regardless of their original background. Decision-making processes consider spiritual and practical factors rather than racial considerations when addressing community issues and membership questions.